Welcome to the deep dive. All right, today we're going to be diving into your collection of articles on CRISPR gene editing. Seems like you're really interested in this whole gene editing thing,
Yeah,
going beyond the headlines, really understanding what CRISPR can do.
absolutely. And
I've
you've got some fascinating sources here.
Let's do it. Let's dive in. What do
Eh,
you say?
Let's dive in.
So CRISPR, what is it really? We throw this term around a lot,
Right.
but it's not just a sci-fi buzzword, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, think about it this way. Remember way back when, high school biology,
Okay.
bacteria, those things are constantly battling viruses.
Right.
And CRISPR, at its core, it's like a bacterial immune system. It's how bacteria remember and fight off those viral invaders.
Interesting. Okay, so that's cool and all, but how does that translate into like gene editing, and why is everyone so excited about it?
Well, that's where things get really, really interesting. Scientists figured out how to repurpose that bacterial defense mechanism. Imagine, like, a pair of molecular scissors, right?
Yeah.
Guided by a GPS system.
Okay.
So these scissors are actually enzymes, most famously this one called Cas9. And that piece of RNA, that's our GPS, guiding those scissors to a precise DNA sequence.
Hmm.
That's how we can target and edit genes with incredible precision, way better than the older gene editing tools.
So we're not just talking about like tweaking genes here. We're talking about like rewriting the code of life itself, aren't we?
Yeah, you could say that. And that's why CRISPR has the potential to completely revolutionize so many fields, from medicine to agriculture and beyond.
I mean, the Jackson Laboratory article, it mentions over 100 clinical trials for somatic genome editing therapies
Wow.
that are already underway.
Yeah.
And just to clarify for our listener, that means we're talking about editing genes in like specific cells or tissues, right?
Yeah.
Not something that would be passed down to future generations.
Exactly. That's an important distinction.
Yeah.
And even at this level, the potential is huge. Think about it. Treating genetic diseases at their root, developing highly targeted cancer therapies, even growing organs for transplantation.
Wow.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and that's just the beginning, right? The Popular Mechanics article, 11 crazy gene hacking things we can do with CRISPR. It really highlights just how many possibilities there are with CRISPR.
It really does.
And
Although
some of them sound pretty wild.
it also reminds us there are some serious ethical considerations that come along with this tech. We're not just talking about breakthroughs in science here.
Right.
We're talking about potentially reshaping life as we know it.
So let's get into it.
Yeah.
What were some of the applications that stood out to you?
Well, that Popular Mechanics article, it really grabs you with that title, 11 Crazy Gene Hacking Things We Can Do with CRISPR. Right? I mean, it really runs the gamut from eradicating diseases to, like, designer pets.
Designer pets. Okay, hold on. We'll get to that. Let's start with something like disease eradication. They mention using CRISPR to make mosquitoes resistant to the malaria parasite,
Right.
which, I mean, imagine a world without malaria. That would be huge.
It would be monumental.
Hmm.
I mean, malaria devastates entire regions of the world, impacts public health, socioeconomic development.
And this article saying that CRISPR could actually make that happen kind of feels like science fiction, you know?
It does. It really does. But, like all good science fiction, it makes you think, like, what happens next?
Mm-hmm.
Eliminating a disease, even one as devastating as malaria, that could have, like, ripple effects, on ecosystems.
Right.
And then there's the whole issue of access distribution. Will this technology actually reach the people who need it the most?
It's not as simple as just flipping a switch, is it?
Exactly.
And on that note, speaking of groundbreaking medical applications, that baby girl who was cured of leukemia using a gene editing tool similar to CRISPR.
Right, right. That really captured the world's attention, and for good reason.
Yeah.
It showed us the potential of personalized medicine, treatments tailored to an individual's genes. It's amazing.
Imagine the possibilities. Curing genetic diseases that we once thought were incurable. Developing these hyper-targeted therapies with way less side effects. It's incredible.
It is, but then again, we have to think about accessibility and affordability.
Right.
Will everyone be able to benefit from these personalized treatments? Or will it end up widening the gap between those who can and cannot afford, cutting-edge healthcare?
That's a really good point. And it's not just human health where we see these CRISPR breakthroughs. That Popular Mechanics article talks about super plants, mildew-proof grapes, fungus-resistant golf courses.
Yeah, transforming agriculture, right?
Yeah.
Imagine engineering crops to withstand, like, really harsh climates or resist pests or maybe even need less water and resources. I mean, it could completely change food security, especially as our climate changes.
The Gaia article brought up a good point, though. It asked, are CRISPR crops really that different from GMOs? Which is something that I think a lot of consumers have been wary of for years.
Yeah, it's a valid question, for sure.
Yeah.
And it gets to the heart of the GMO debate, right?
Right.
Like, how comfortable are we with manipulating the genes in our food?
Yeah.
What are the long-term consequences? And I mean both the intended and unintended ones.
Seems to be a recurring theme with CRISPR. This incredible power, this incredible potential,
Right.
but this, lingering question of unintended
Yeah, and
consequences.
those consequences, they're not just limited to the environment or what we eat.
Yeah.
Think about those designer pets the article mentioned.
Oh, right, right.
Micropigs, genetically engineered to stay small so they can be pets.
Yeah, and as much as I love the idea of a teacup pig, it does feel a little weird?
It's like, where do we draw the line,
Yeah.
Is it ethical to manipulate an animal's genes just because we want a certain aesthetic? What about, disease resistance or like increased productivity? Where does it end?
And if we're talking about blurring ethical lines, we have to talk about editing human embryos.
Right.
I mean, the article mentioned using CRISPR to potentially cure blindness,
Which would be amazing.
which would be amazing, but it also opens the door to editing things like intelligence or physical appearance?
Right. Designer babies.
Yeah.
It's not science fiction anymore. It's a real discussion we need to be having, ethical, societal, all of it, especially in light of that whole CRISPR babies scandal back in 2018.
Right, where that scientist in China used CRISPR to edit the genes of those twin girls, claiming to make them resistant to HIV.
Right. And that Nature article really dug into the fallout from that whole situation, and it really
Yeah.
shook the scientific community.
Yeah.
It really underscored the need for stricter regulations, ethical guidelines, all of it. We can't just focus on all the exciting possibilities without acknowledging the potential for misuse.
We have to be asking the tough questions
Absolutely.
about how we govern this technology, who gets to use it, what are the limits of its application.
Exactly.
It really makes you think, it's like we're on the verge of something huge, something that could change everything.
It really is. And it goes way beyond just scientific progress. It's about figuring out, like, what does it even mean to be human when we have the power to, rewrite the code of life?
It's a big one for sure. So where do we go from here? What are some key takeaways, you think, for our listener after this deep dive?
Well, I think the biggest thing to remember is that CRISPR, it's a tool, right?
Mhm.
And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
Right.
It has the potential to cure diseases, enhance agriculture, maybe even reshape our species. But it could also make existing inequalities even worse, lead to unintended consequences, create these huge ethical dilemmas.
It always seems to come back to that question of responsibility.
Exactly.
Just because we can do something, does that mean we should?
Right. And that's why we need to have these open discussions, and thoughtful regulation, right? We have to talk honestly about both the good and the bad, the potential benefits, the risks, and then, develop some solid ethical frameworks to guide
Mm.
how we develop and use this technology.
Yeah, and I think that's where our listeners come in, right? This deep dive, it was really just the starting point. Now it's up to all of us to learn more, to engage in these really important conversations and help shape the future of CRISPR. Make sure it benefits all of us.
I completely agree. I'd encourage everyone listening, go back, reread those articles,
Yeah.
think critically, what really resonated with you, what concerns you, because your voice, your perspective, it matters in this conversation.
Yeah, and maybe after wrestling with all of this, these complex questions, you'll find yourself asking that big what if question.
Right.
If you had the power to edit the code of life, what would you change? And maybe even more importantly, how would you use that power responsibly?
It really makes you think about, like, your values, your hopes for the future.
Yeah.
What kind of world do we want to create?
That's CRISPR for you folks. Complex, fascinating, and a little bit mind-blowing.
It really is.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the world of CRISPR. We hope you learned a lot and that it sparked some good conversations maybe. And hey, if you want to keep the conversation going, head over to our social media. Let us know what you thought, what surprised you, what questions do you still have.
We'd love to hear from you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.